So as I'm sitting there with the other nurse, and we're listening to her, and the young lady gets called away for her 30 minutes with her psychiatrist or her therapist. And as she gets up to walk away, I have the gift of second sight. I saw on her back, over each shoulder, like a Santa Claus bag. And I'm saying a bag, they weren't really in a bag, but the only way to describe the way that they were clustered together, it looked like a standard size clear pillowcase, because they were all clustered together like grapes, these heads that were, some of them were inverted with the eyes on the bottom and the mouth on the top. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my God, she really is hearing 25 different voices. She's got attachments on her back. So she went ahead and she went to her meeting, and she came back, and I found her room, and I knocked on the door, and she invited me in. And I said to her, I said, look, I'm going to tell you something that sounds crazy. I said, but if you tell anybody else, they're going to keep you here longer. I said, I believe that you are really hearing 25 different voices because you are carrying attachments on your back. And her face kind of got disgruntled, because sometimes when there are attachments, they become enraged when they're exposed. So she became kind of disgruntled and turned her back on me and started to walk away. And the way that they were connected at her shoulder, it was almost like a twisted grapevine, but like of a horn type consistency, that attached at the very top of her shoulder, and a like C clasp underneath her armpit, but didn't go all the way around. And so that particular day, I mean, I do remove attachments from people, but I have to make sure that I am not, having any illness or anything myself, because I have to prepare so that they don't attach to me. I don't want to bring them home with me. And this particular day, I had a lot of stressful things in my own life going on, and I didn't really feel up to removing them, again, afraid that they would come home with me. But something just came over me in that moment as she turned her back. And I took my fingers and I scooped them underneath those two C clasp type things that were actually standing up off of her skin by about an inch, and pulled them off. And the little heads started falling off like grapes, just falling off of a cluster onto the floor. And I started trying to stomp them into the floor the best that I could. And a few of them rolled away and got away. And when she turned around to me, she said, it felt like you were pulling grass off of my back. Now, she didn't even know what I had just done, but she felt it when she turned around, and that was her response. And I told her, I said, look, this is a temporary fix. I said, when you get out of here, you need to go and find someone that can help you with this, because you still have some that are clustered around your bed. Some of them rolled off, in areas. They can reattach to you. But please, when you get out of here, find somebody.
I'm here with a woman called Lynn Monet, and I read her book called Omnipresent, What Happened Next. It's a fantastic book. It's well written, insightful, and original. Lynn approaches the area of the paranormal with her own unique way of seeing it. And as an empath, she can literally see into it, describing the spirits she sometimes sees as though they're physical beings. Indeed, she talks of spiritual dimensions and planes in this book like a modern day mystic, and I kept thinking of Swedenborg throughout the book, imagining he'd have been nodding his head if he'd read the book too. Questions such as what are orbs are answered, as well as topics like aliens, hybrids, and heavenly principles. A lot is going on in this book, and Lynn combines it all with her stories and anecdotes of real people in her life, giving it a novel effect. A great book. I highly recommend it to anyone who has even a faint interest in spirituality. So Lynn, how are you?
Fine, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I've been really looking forward to this.
Fantastic, fantastic. I was really looking forward to speaking to you as well. So as I said, I read your book. Your book is fantastic. It's jam-packed with great stuff, great areas, and it's the quintessential page turner. It was for me anyways. So can you just tell us a little bit about your background and what you worked as a end of life nurse. How did you come about working in that area?
Well, first of all, as a child, I've always had gifts. My family and I had three siblings. There were four of us total, and we lived a few short blocks behind a hospital. And it was commonplace for us to see the ghosts of people in patient gowns passing through our house, as well as there were Indian mounds on the other side of the hospital. So we would see Indians. The thing that was unique about this hospital is that the hospital was also connected with a convalescent home at that time, which is what they were called. So there were, elderly people there. So to us, it was commonplace. And of course, back in the 60s, because I am 60, and so I was born in 1963. So back in the 60s, that's just not something that you talked about. I mean, your parents didn't want the neighbors to know. I mean, they would literally send men in white coats to your house if you talked about seeing things like that. So, my parents were always kind of squelching it. And, oh, well, you're not seeing that type of thing. But something very, very distinct happened that really, really, that I'll never forget. I can remember it like it was yesterday. My brother was 7, I was 5. We were in my parents' master bedroom, and I was fixing up myself. I had gotten in my mother's jewelry box, and I was putting all these earrings and things on. And my brother was in the room playing with his cars on the floor. And I turned to show my brother how glamorous I had made myself. And he was fixated on the corner of the room. And so I looked to see what he was looking at. And there was this area that was misting in the corner. And in that corner stepped in my brother's very best friend, John's brother and his mother and father. And they all just floated in this mist, kind of standing in it, smiling at us. And so my brother got up and he ran out of the bedroom in one direction. I got up and ran out of the bedroom in the other direction. We were looking for our mother. And of course, my brother found my mother first. And he runs, he says, Mom, John's here with his family. And of course, my mother's like, well, I didn't even hear anybody knock at the door. So she's straight, and he says, yes, and they're in your bedroom. And she says, they're in my bedroom. Who let them in my bedroom? So of course, she's fixing herself and rushing to the bedroom to get these people out of her bedroom. And of course, when she gets back in there, there's nothing there. And my brother got in trouble for that. So, and even though I saw that at the same time, I kept my mouth shut because I didn't want to get in trouble too. And, I let my brother kind of take that one, which he made up for it years later. But anyway, so the very next day, we have a week off of elementary school called spring break here in United States. And it was the Monday following that we went back to school. Sunday, the event happened where my brother and I saw his friend in my parents' bedroom. So my brother was on the bus going to school. And of course, little John wasn't on the bus. He always sat with him. It was his best friend. And then he gets to the classroom and he shared a side-by-side desk with John. And again, little John was not there. And after the announcements were made in the class, the teacher stood up in the class and had said that John would not be returning to school because he and his entire family perished in an auto accident the day before. They had been on vacation and they came back. And so, it's like I said, it's something that I will never forget because they came to say goodbye is what they did. And of course, going home then, my mother had heard about it and she knew what had happened the day before. So she didn't really know what to do about it, but yet she didn't tell, we didn't get in trouble as much when we talked about things like that. But anyway, moving forward, when I was 10 years old, my mother, I was born and raised Presbyterian, and my mother took a jaunt as a Jehovah's Witness, which is a book within itself, but we won't go there. And at that time, I was still seeing things. And so my mother took me to the elders, which are equivalent to like a minister or priest or, the head of the church that makes the decisions. And at 10 years old, I was standing in this group of men just horrified as they went on to tell me that I was possessed, that what I was seeing was demons, that there was something wrong with me, that I was going to die in Armageddon, and all of those things. And it scared me so badly that I ended up ignoring my gifts. I would still see things, but like anybody else, I would get up and run out of the room just as scared because I thought that they were awful things. And so as time went moved forward, I had had two children, and I was a single mother, and I had purchased a house that was so haunted. I purchased a house not knowing it was haunted, but I purchased a house and was never able to move into it. It was that bad with my children. So being exposed to that house and trying to find help for that house, I was able to connect with people of like mind. And when I did that, it validated all of the things, the experiences and everything that I had had as a child. And and also being in a room with people that were seeing things in that house the same time that I was, which is about my first book, Omnipresent. I have Omnipresent is going to be a 5-book series. Omnipresent is the first book. It's about the house that I bought that I was never able to move into. Um, Omnipresent, What Happens Next is a follow up to that as well, talking about my gift of second sight and being able to see attachments on people with addiction as well as mental illness. Also, I have a third book, which kind of is touched on in the chapters of the Omnipresent, What Happens Next, but I wrote a whole book in detail on the Omnipresent 111 Becca Dawn Drive. And I've also in the process written with I'm a nurse. I've been a nurse for 40 years. As I said, I turned 60. And I've been an end of life care nurse for almost 20 years. So I've seen a lot of people pass away, and I've seen the consistencies, and there really is a beauty and a peacefulness to death, in the sense of when someone's actively passing. Um, and I wrote the book hoping to take the stigma of death and dying away. I do see people when they leave their bodies. I do see loved ones coming in to greet them. And anybody that's galactically inclined, it is all connected. So the book explains how all of that is connected as well. And I just recently also had my sister pass away and saw some beautiful things with that. So I'll be writing a book on that as well coming up. And then I have a book called The Gap, which is not of the paranormal sense. It's a book for adolescents and teens. It kind of fills in the gap where the birds and the bees leave off and where human trafficking picks up, and fills in all of those little things that even when parents have read the book, they're like, gee, even I didn't know that. So it's important. There are very, very important things, but I recommend parents read it first because it is very straightforward, not candy coated. And you need to make sure that the information in it is something that you want your child to read.
Lynn, in your book, you talk about abusive relationships and suicide, and just going from that point about giving advice to young people nowadays, can you talk about suicide and abusive relationships and the type of things that are dangerous about them?
Yes. For one thing, what I have learned spiritually is that we do have multiple times that we are allowed to exit life that is a God-given or a spiritually given exit. However, suicide is not one of them. Suicide, even spiritually, is not ever acceptable. Well, I take that back. Assisted suicide for somebody that is actually already dying is looked at very much differently. Somebody who's suffering from severe mental illness, it is also looked at differently. However, suicide should never be an option. And in the book that I did write with The Gap, there are multiple hotlines and help that you can reach out to, and also ways to never get into the situation where you feel the need to do that to begin with. So yeah, suicide, when a lot of times too, people don't realize that when they do commit suicide, they're sent right back in. So it's not really relieving anything. They kind of wander around. Suicide is considered like a sudden death, and there are three different kinds of death. There's natural death, with which most of us have. There's sudden death, which is unexpected, and the suicide is one of the things that are considered sudden death. And a lot of, and anybody that has ever been resuscitated or whatever after a suicide, they always regret the suicide. And so it's something to consider. But hopefully, with these boundaries and things, and being to place these boundaries and having a better understanding of even relationships and how people think differently, hopefully will help to give them healthier boundary and more control, that they won't get into a situation where they feel that desperate and lost.
Okay. Uh, can you talk about addiction? Nowadays, there's a lot of people are addicted, and addiction is a big problem nowadays. What are your thoughts about addiction?
You know, all of us that are, most all of us that are on this earth right now have incarnated. We have not reincarnated, we've incarnated. And because we have come in and chosen to come in during this time, our lights are very, very bright. And of course, it puts the darkness on overtime trying to dub out the light. So, of course, they want to have us distracted with certain things. But when I went back to college to further my degree later in life, and I had to do a rotation in the psychiatric ward. And the reason why I'm going in this direction is because people have to understand that when you have an addiction, you are literally carrying an attachment on your back. So, and I'll tell this story if you would like me to. It has to do with also mental illness and schizophrenia, but it does tie in the addiction part of it. If you'd like me to continue
Please,
with that.
please, yeah, please.
Okay, when I went back to nursing school, I had to do a rotation through. I had a psych class that I had to do rotation through a psychiatric ward for a whole week. And this particular day, we went into the psychiatric ward. There were 8 nurses and a teacher. The teacher separated from us to go and get our assignments. And while we're sitting there, this young woman, and first of all, I had to back up a little bit. We were in the intake area. So it was the area where people were just newly being brought in. They hadn't had their medications balanced yet or anything like that. We literally had to sign papers that we would not hold the facility responsible if we got hit or bitten or harmed in any way by the residents that were living there, the patients that were there. So as I'm standing there with this group of 8 nurses, this young woman, looked to be about 20, 21 years old, walks up to me and she points at me and she says, "You can help me. I know you can." And of course, I'm like, oh my gosh, I hope she's not talking to me. I wanted to be, Lynn, the student nurse that day, not Lynn, the weirdo. So I'm like hoping that she's talking to somebody behind me, and that all of a sudden the teacher comes along and ushers us out of the room. But I got placed back in that area, myself with another fellow nurse. We were both placed back into that area. And they had picnic tables that were bolted to the floor. And I was sitting at one of the picnic tables with my fellow nurse, and we were doing our charting. And the young girl comes over and sits down with us. And she started to talk about her life and how she had been molested by her priest or whoever it was, minister in her church, from like age 10 to age 14. And then her mother remarried, and the stepfather then started to rape her until she ran away when she was like 16 years old. And as she's sitting next to me, I'm looking at her, and this woman is covered in claw marks. And the thing about it is I became familiar with the claw marks from the house that I purchased unbeknownst to me, that was haunted and I was never able to move into, because my very best friend was clawed to the point of bleeding on her back and stomach while she stood next to me in that house. And these claw marks, they look like a cat scratch, like a single cat scratch. And this woman had those claw marks all over her. She was wearing a pair of shorts, and she had a top with very, very thin straps, so I could get a good view of her skin areas. she had them coming out of her ears, out of her nose, on her back in places that there's no way that she could have, unless she was a contortionist, that she could have done that to herself. And the facility was claiming that she was self-inflicting those. She even said that one of the she said that she had 25 different voices that were talking to her, and she said that one of them had a large nail that was also scratching her on the inside of her female parts. So as I'm sitting there with the other nurse, and we're listening to her, and the young lady gets called away for her 30 minutes with her psychiatrist or her therapist. And as she gets up to walk away, I have the gift of second sight. I saw on her back, over each shoulder, like a Santa Claus bag. And I'm saying a bag, they weren't really in a bag, but the only way to describe the way that they were clustered together, it looked like a standard size clear pillowcase, because they were all clustered together like grapes, these heads that were, some of them were inverted with the eyes on the bottom and the mouth on the top. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my God, she really is hearing 25 different voices. She's got attachments on her back. So she went ahead and she went to her meeting, and she came back, and I found her room, and I knocked on the door, and she invited me in. And I said to her, I said, look, I'm going to tell you something that sounds crazy. I said, but if you tell anybody else, they're going to keep you here longer. I said, I believe that you are really hearing 25 different voices because you are carrying attachments on your back. And her face kind of got disgruntled, because sometimes when there are attachments, they become enraged when they're exposed. So she became kind of disgruntled and turned her back on me and started to walk away. And the way that they were connected at her shoulder, it was almost like a twisted grapevine, but like of a horn type consistency that attached at the very top of her shoulder, and a like C clasp underneath her armpit, but didn't go all the way around. And so that particular day, I mean, I do remove attachments from people, but I have to make sure that I am not, having any illness or anything myself, because I have to prepare so that they don't attach to me. I don't want to bring them home with me. And this particular day, I had a lot of stressful things in my own life going on, and I didn't really feel up to removing them, again, afraid that they would come home with me. But something just came over me in that moment as she turned her back. And I took my fingers and I scooped them underneath those two C-clasp type things that were actually standing up off of her skin by about an inch, and pulled them off. And the little heads started falling off like grapes, just falling off of a cluster onto the floor. And I started trying to stomp them into the floor the best that I could. And a few of them rolled away and got away. And when she turned around to me, she said, it felt like you were pulling grass off of my back. Now, she didn't even know what I had just done, but she felt it when she turned around, and that was her response. And I told her, I said, look, this is a temporary fix. I said, when you get out of here, you need to go and find someone that can help you with this, because you still have some that are clustered around your bed. Some of them rolled off, in areas they can reattach to you. But please, when you get out of here, find somebody. So about a year later, I was in a Walmart shopping. I was looking at candles or something. I was crouched down in one of the aisles trying to look at one of the lower areas, and I see these two women at the end of the aisle talking to each other, and they're turning and they're looking at me, and I'm like, well, maybe I've got toilet paper stuck to my shoe, or something. So I'm checking myself, and then I hear one say, I know that that's her. And I thought, oh, well, maybe they read one of my books, maybe it's a fan. And so I stood up, and the young lady walked over, and I didn't really fully recognize her at first. She, when I saw her before, she was a little bit larger framed. She had very, very short hair. She was very pasty looking because of the draw of the attachments that were on her back that were taking her over. And here's this woman standing in front of me with this beautiful little blonde bob type haircut. She had her makeup on. She had lost weight. And I'm looking at her and I'm like, you look familiar, but I don't place you. She said, you're the nurse. You're the nurse that helped me. And it hit me. And I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, she looked amazing. She was going to school to become a dental hygienist. And, and she said that she had been taken off of all of her schizophrenic medication and that she was just on something for mild anxiety. So it actually helped her. But with that being said, while I was still in that facility, that happened the first day. I was still in that facility for 4 more days for the whole week. And I started walking around the facility and I was noticing that there were people with these cluster type attachments, sometimes on the front, usually mostly on the back, but that there were other people that had these, what I call archons. They looked like crabs or spiders or reptilian. The reptilian ones sometimes would have a tail, like an alligator, or they would have a human buttocks with no tail. Um, and they were attached to the backs of these people like a neat little backpack where their feet would kind of attach at the top of the hips. And they had a head that would protrude out either side of the head or align with the head. However, the thing that was very distinct about their heads is that their heads were much smaller in comparison to their body. And they had a distinct flap, like a fin almost, that started from the very top of their head and then reconnected in at the nape. And I say a fin because they when people have been able to overcome their addiction, these things do disconnect from them, but they don't ever leave their realm, so to speak. So a lot of times, even though somebody's been in recovery, you'll still see that archon up on the ceiling in their house. They kind of jump from corner to corner and side to side. They usually don't come down further than about 3 feet on the ceiling, and they can turn their head all the way around. And that's where you can see the flap. It's not rigid like a dolphin, it's floppy. So it kind of falls over their face when they turn their head around. And so saw these people walking around in the facility with these attachment type things on their back. So and it's part of the reason why people with addiction constantly have to go with and do follow-up and go to their meetings and go to the people that are supporting them, because they constantly have that archon in their home or in their realm whispering and enticing them, trying to get them to slip up to start their addiction again so that they can reattach. I mean, they've had a good thing going. The archons feed off of the negativity that the addiction creates, such as the job loss or the rippling effect even out into the community of somebody that's breaking into homes and things like that, to get money for their addictions, the divorce that it causes and the sorrow that it causes within the family. There's always that rippling effect, and the archons feed on that. It's their candy. That negativity is their candy, and it enables them to do more physical acts. So, and that's also with demonic things too. They love that negativity type thing. It is a dark creature type thing. And like I said, they look like spiders, they look reptilian, or they look like crabs. Crabs are the hardest ones to get off. So so as I'm walking around the facility, I'm asking the other 8 nurses, there were 8 of us there, the other 7 nurses that were there. I'm like, by chance, does your client have schizophrenia? Yeah. How'd you know? Well, by chance, does your client have an addiction problem? Yeah. How'd you know? And out of all of the ones that I guessed, I only got one of them wrong. And that one, the reason why I got that one wrong was because it was a combination. The person had schizophrenia plus they had an addiction. So it showed up as one, not the other. And that's how that turned out. But people need to realize that the addiction, there's more to it. It's one thing to have somebody that does have an occasional drink, I'm not saying that you can't do that. However, if you have an addiction, you've already flipped that switch, and anything is a gateway to take you back to where you were. So you really have to abstain from the substance that the Archon is drawn to, because even one will make it reattach. And also, a lot of times too, with having the gift of second sight, when your time comes to cross over to the other side, a lot of times, for one thing, you have the choice to cross over or not. But a lot of times people will choose not to cross over because of their addiction, and it will hold them here earthbound. And that's another thing, to consider. I mean, I have actually walked into sports bars, and I've seen people sitting at the bar having a drink, and they don't even realize that this headless man is standing there with them, with his head sitting on the bar, with his nose up over the rock glass, trying to sniff it, just to smell it, or people on their cigarette break, and there's dead people standing around them while they're smoking, trying to smell the fumes. And granted, it's very complicated. So I'm just kind of briefly going through some of it. And it's not that they have the ability to smell. On the other side, when you are in a spirit form, things come to you through thought. So when you think of going somewhere, you think of it, you just go. If you, as my mother told me from the other side, even when it comes to eating, because I asked her, I said, Mom, I said, don't you ever miss the taste of brownies or coleslaw or spaghetti or anything like that? And she said, well, of course, here we don't eat, we do everything by thought. And so she told me that all they have to do is think about the food, and the flavor and the sensation of eating it comes to them as if they are, even though they don't eat it by mouth. So with that being said, even though they're not able to smell like we do within our bodies, we have a nose, we have an olfactory center that creates the ability to smell scent, scent. They can stand in it and reminisce about the way that it smelled, and the smell also so that sensation comes to them in the same way as it would if when you're on the other side. So they are smelling it in a memory sort of recall way, and they end up staying here. So it's really important to deal with your addictions before you cross over. And not that you can't cross over with an addiction. If you cross over with an addiction, you're immediately helped. But there are a lot of people that are afraid to leave their addiction behind, so they choose to stay here, and those are the ghosts that end up haunting people's houses and haunting bars and things like that. So yeah, it is complicated, and it
Are
is addiction is hard to stop because of having that constant temptation, because the Archon wants to reattach.
so are archons and earthbounds and attachments the same? What's the difference between an attachment and an earthbound spirit, for example?
The attachments are souls that have not crossed over, that choose to attach to another human being in order to kind of live vicariously through them. So when they find a host who has tears, so to speak, or cracks in the windshield, so to speak, of their auric field, they can attach. And that's why it's so important that you keep your bubble around you in good condition. And that is how they attach. So they are humans, they are human spirits that have lived before that attach. And a lot of times too, the thing about attachments is they can be controlled by something that is more dark, poltergeist or demonic things, and there are a difference in those. So that's how that works. The other things are, how can I say, they are always in waiting. They sometimes come off of other people. If they see the option, again, the aura, the addiction does damage that, anything in excess. So they attach with that. They're not man-made, but I talk about platforms in my book, and the platforms are man-made. They sometimes look, I've seen them look like an oval tablecloth with the rippling edges, almost like a manta ray, only an oval, thing like swimming across the floor, coming off of furniture, because those do. Or I've seen them as snakes and also silhouettes of people. Those can be dissipated easily with sage and balancing of energy, but they are man-made. And the more someone, like for instance, if you're in a house where there's a lot of arguing, or someone is even sick, it can enlarge those platforms, and they build and they get bigger and bigger and bigger and stronger with the negativity, but they then become platforms for something more negative to enter through portals. So a lot of times then you can end up with a demon in your house or something like that. The archons are, they can enter in through those, they come through other dimensions, but a lot of times too, when somebody passes and they do cross over, they don't carry the archon with them anymore, so the archon kind of sits in wait. And of course, because they can see people with the brighter lights, especially those of us here that have incarnated, they really want to derail that person's life, because the reason for which you've come in as an incarnate is to serve a purpose here. You're not here so much for the education that someone that reincarnates does. You've already met a lot of your goals that way. You are coming in here for a service as a light anchor or light bearer or something, but you are here for a service. And when that brighter light is seen by negative, by anything of the dark, which archons are of the dark, they immediately want again to dub that out. So they try to derail you at a very early age. And most people's addictions do start at very early ages. So that's kind of how that happens.
How
I
many
hope I
dimensions?
explained it okay.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, excellent. How many dimensions are there?
Oh my gosh. Well, it depends on if you count the lower ones too. Um, I I have heard that there are 12, maybe even more. I've only been able to learn more so about like 8 of them, because as they're, I mean, 8 of them because my mother's on the other side, my relatives are on the other side, and they talk about some of the things that go on there. The 5th is what we would call heaven, or the other side, or where we go back to home to. When we're here on this earth, part of the majority of our soul, for lack of a better word, is already on the other side. Only a fragmented piece of who we are on the other side comes to this earth, and we return to that when we leave here. So so that as we become whole. um um I'm sorry, would you ask me that again? I want to make sure that I'm answering it correctly. I kind of got off on a tangent there a little bit.
No, you were answering it. I was just curious how many dimensions there are, and like
Oh,
where is the Earth in comparison to,
right.
in relation
What
to the dimensions?
We are on the 3rd dimension. The earth is the 3rd dimension. Heaven, as we call it, is the 5th. There's that 4th dimension that's kind of thinning a little bit, so that the 5th is almost starting to meet the 3rd. The 4th dimension, and I just want to say this too, I'm saying 8 because there's also dimensions that go below the earth. And those dimensions, as there are a hierarchy of angels, starting with the cherubim going on up to like the beautiful archangels, there's also a hierarchy of demonic things that start, and the deeper that they go, the higher their level is. So but yes, the 4th dimension is a very odd area. A lot of times our lost souls are in the 4th dimension because they have chosen not to cross over. They still have kept their mental illnesses, they've kept their addictions, they've kept their cause of death still shows. They still have their senses, so they can hear you, they can see you, they can smell in the way that I explained before, that they can smell type things. So some of the senses go with them. Whereas when you cross over, your cause of death does not show, you've become more perfected, you don't have the addiction, you don't have the mental illness, all of that gets left behind, which this is a spoiler alert. I'm going to share something with you that I haven't shared on any show because I just found this out myself. If you'd like me to, I got a little
Please,
secret.
please, Lynn. Yeah, push
Yes,
through.
and this is special for the show. I have found recently that, like, for instance, when my sister passed away and she decided to be cremated, I was taking her ashes to the ocean where she played as a little girl and we grew up playing as children. She wanted to go there and be placed into the ocean. What I noticed is that even having to carry her directly with my hands, that there is an energy that comes off of the ashes of the leftovers that are left behind. So my sister crossed over. I saw her cross over. So all of her illness and her depression and any animosity or jealousy or anything like that that she had in her lifetime, even though there was still a familiarity about her with those ashes, the negative things that were taken from her when she crossed over were left behind in those ashes. And people don't realize that. I did not realize that either. You know, a lot of times people will want to take their aunt's ashes or their mother's ashes and put them in a pendant and wear it around their neck so that they can be close to that person. Um, you know, after learning what I've learned with that, I personally would not do that. I'm not saying that you can't do that. There is still a familiar energy that comes off those ashes that is familiar, because you figure when we're on earth as people, you know, even though we're good people, you know, we might have something that really, really annoys us, like getting on the interstate and screaming obscenities at the little old lady trying, you know, slowing us down, or certain things might bother us, or maybe we're jealous of somebody, but all of those things get left behind when you cross over, but they get left in the remnants that are left behind, including the ashes. And if you are an empath, you can feel that. So, and it's only with humans. The animals aren't that way. Like if you have your cat or your dog cremated and everybody, you do see your pets on the other side, you'll have a special meeting with them. And you might even be surprised at some of the other animals that approach from previous lifetimes. You might have an elephant or a camel as a pet. So don't be surprised. It's not just your pets from this lifetime. But when the pets pass and you have their ashes, they don't have that same residual because they don't have the emotions for jealousy. You know what I mean? It's different. They love unconditionally. So it's different than it is for the humans, that we have some of our little petty quirks and things like that. So I that is something that'll be going into my next book that I'll be writing, as far as a sequel to The Colors of Heaven, which
Okay.
talks about the transitioning from this side to the other side that way. But yeah, and I've got some beautiful stories to share about that if anybody has any doubts of that. And like I said too, with the experiences that I've had, I have seen people pass away. I've seen what comes in to collect them. And if you are galactically inclined, it is all connected.
What do you
So,
think of aliens? What connection do aliens have?
oh, I believe in aliens. And a lot of times, you know, we're talking about that fourth dimension. I've actually seen aliens. I've seen ships, but I have personally seen aliens. Working on my nurse's unit, I had one patient that I believe was a hybrid. She had eyes that were very large and bulging. And the thing that I've noticed too, I've come across two of them that I believe are, they don't have children. These two people didn't have children. So that's one thing that they had in common. Not that I'm saying that hybrids can't, but the two that I came across did not have children. They had this very wide-eyed, like a rabbit look to their expression. Um, I was working on my unit, and this one patient, I had 23 rooms that were all filled with patients, and this one lady's room, and only in this lady's room, there were several different occasions that I went into her room, and there were aliens in her room, standing behind her, kind of pulling. It looked like the old time switchboard operators for the telephone. And a lot of young people that are listening to this, you might hear your parents talking about the party lines and the things with the telephones, where the operator would actually sit with a headphone on and pull a plug out and plug a plug in somewhere else to make the phone call transfer. This is what it looked like they were doing to the back of this lady. She called me for her pain medicine one night, and I went down, and she was laying on her side facing the door. And when I walked in, there were three. They were all dressed the same. They were all the same height. So I'm wondering if they were being used remotely from a larger source, a larger ship or something maybe. Also, they were behind a veil. Now I could see between the veils, so I was able to see them. And that fourth dimension that I had mentioned is manipulated a lot of times, not only by lost spirits and some of the weird things that are in there, but a lot of times aliens do use that fourth dimension as a camouflage between the veils, so that they can work on Earth side by side with people, and people not even know that that's happening. And even as well as creatures like Bigfoot, I mean, he also knows how to manipulate. He's real. He knows how to manipulate the dimensions. I mean, how many people have tried to? Had a Bigfoot sighting, and they've tried to chase him down, even with dogs, and they get him cornered into a area that is either straight up, mountains, or straight down mountains, and all of a sudden he disappears, smell and all. It's because he knows how to manipulate the veils between the dimensions. So either he steps into a portal, or his consciousness is so advanced that he's able to make himself cloaked to people because of the way that he thinks. He can hide himself. And I mean, in something that large and stinky, that almost seems impossible to do that. But yes, I believe that he is also an alien form here. I think a lot of these things, the Mothman, the Goat Man, all of these kind of oddities that we have seen, to us, are alien formed and maybe placed here to see how they fare, or maybe get left behind here by accident. I've recently had a run-in with an elemental. I never knew anything about elementals. Well, I have had just this last week an experience where a very negative elemental that wanted a rock that was placed inside of my sister's house, and my sister had picked it up and put it in her room. This is also a spoiler alert, nothing I've talked about ever before. She had picked up a rock from outside that was a kind of a sparkly rock, and she had brought in this rock from outside, not realizing that it belonged to an elemental. It was a little, almost troll looking like entity. And because she put the rock in the house, I mean, I think that it's what made her sick. I think that it's even might have been her demise, because you hear people going to sites and picking up trinkets off the ground, or going to tombs and picking up something from the tomb, or touching the tomb, and then all of a sudden everybody that was there starts getting sick, or everybody there dies. There are things until or you have horrible luck until you take it back and put it back, where it was. In this case, it was a rock in the house that
Wow.
that belonged to the elemental. And so we had to return the elemental to outside, because he was literally creating havoc in this house that I'm sitting in right now, trying to clear out of my sister's, not letting my son and I sleep, and leaving us with vine type things. It felt like tied around our legs. But we found this rock and realized that that was the issue. So we took it outside and put it back. We haven't had any problems since. Sometimes they're given as gifts, believe it or not. But this particular rock had a really, really funny energy about it. I mean, everybody, even people that weren't sensitives, commented on it, but didn't want to pick it up and touch it. It was like this, no, don't touch it, no, don't touch it kind of thing. And you could literally, my son and I, we could hear the thing grumbling. And I mean, he was cussing at me. He was calling me horrible things because, I'm looking at his rock, and you could hear, it was like this grumbling that he was doing. And every once in a word, a cuss word would pop out, or, type thing. And my son and I are seeing, we're hearing this. He's like, "Do you hear him?" I said, "Yeah." He says he's grumbling. So
Hmm.
we made it, and it just so happens that with elementals, sometimes you can make a deal with them. So we made a deal with him, gave him back his rock. We gave him a brass bell that he liked because it played, because to them it makes music. So we put that out there, hung it over the rock, and he's just as happy as he can be out there. He has not been back in the house in 3 days. So that was interesting as well. And like I said, my first experience with that type of an
Yeah,
elemental,
well,
but all of these things coexist with us on this earth, and we just don't realize it. I when I went to take my sister to the beach, we have shells on our beach instead of rocks. I remember collecting them in the ocean, and then I got out and I returned them to the ocean. I admired them, and then I put them back in the water. So, I mean, sometimes they are gifts. I felt that there might have been a few pieces that I was intended to take, but I chose not to, because they're the gemstones